The Void Queen Elara did not just come for our resources. She came for the spectacle of our extinction. From the obsidian throne of the Star Eater, a vessel so massive it cast a literal shroud over the Western Hemisphere, she looked down at Earth and saw a playground. To her, we weren't a threat. We weren't even a nuisance. We were a primitive curiosity. She had spent 3 centuries erasing civilizations from the star charts, and her formula was always the same: arrive, display a fraction of her power, and watch the locals crumble into worship or weeping. But as she adjusted her shimmering gown of liquid starlight, gazing through the ship's diamond glass hull, she noticed something that made her let out a cold, melodic laugh. The humans weren't hiding. Down below, a fleet of metallic shuttles, clunky, patched-together ships that looked like they belonged in a museum, were rising to meet her. They were disorganized. They were slow. They looked like dragonflies trying to stop a hurricane. Elara signaled her High Admiral, a towering being of bioluminescent nerves. "Do they truly believe these tin cans can touch the Star Eater?" she asked, her voice like grinding silk. "Admiral, do not even waste the primary cannons. Let them get close. I want to see the terror on their faces through the sensors before we incinerate the atmosphere. Hold on before we get into the real stuff. I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments." As the human ships, led by a battered frigate named the Valiant Rose, drifted into the shadow of the Empress's Armada, the silence in the Void Queen's throne room was heavy with arrogance. Billions of citizens across the Elarian Empire were watching the live feed, laughing at the sheer audacity of these Terrans. The Empress leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the lead human ship. It wasn't firing. It wasn't maneuvering. It was just floating there. "They've paralyzed themselves with fear," the Admiral sneered, his hand hovering over the delete command for the sector. But then, a strange pulse began to ripple across the Empress's tactical display. It wasn't a weapon lock. It wasn't a shield frequency. It was a signal. A simple, rhythmic beat, like a digital heart hammering against the hull of the world-ending ship. Elara's smile flickered. "What is that noise?" she demanded. The Admiral checked the readings, his glow dimming in confusion. "It's a broadcast, Majesty. But it's not directed at our comms. It's directed at our core, the very soul of the ship." Suddenly, the lights in the throne room didn't just flicker, they turned blood red. The hum of the Star Eater's engines, a sound that had persisted for 1,000 years, vanished into a terrifying, absolute silence. The Empress stood up, her heart racing for the first time in an era. "Status report," she screamed. But the Admiral couldn't answer. His HUD had gone black. Every screen on the ship displayed a single sentence in the Terran language, flickering in gold. "You invited yourself into our home. Now let us show you how we keep the doors locked." Outside, the primitive human ships began to glow with a terrifying sapphire intensity. The Empress realized with a jolt of pure dread that they hadn't been rising to fight her. They were just moving into position to act as a giant, planetary-scale grounding wire. The silence within the Star Eater was more than just a lack of sound. It was a physical weight. On a ship that housed 3 million souls and powered an entire sector's worth of conquest, the sudden absence of the engine's thrum felt like the universe had stopped breathing. Empress Elara gripped the arms of her throne, her knuckles turning a ghostly translucent white. "Admiral, I demanded a status report," she hissed, but her voice didn't echo. The sound-dampening fields had collapsed along with the life support. The High Admiral was frantically clawing at a dead holographic interface. "Majesty, the bridge is unresponsive. The neural link, it's been severed. I can't feel the ship anymore." In their culture, the high-ranking officers were biologically tethered to their vessels. To lose that connection was like having a limb amputated in an instant. Across the Armada, thousands of Elarian commanders were collapsing in psychic shock. Outside the diamond glass hull, the scene was even more surreal. The majestic, terrifying wall of warships that had surrounded Earth just moments ago was now drifting aimlessly. Great destroyers, capable of cracking moons, were colliding with one another like drunken giants in the dark. Their glowing propulsion trails had snuffed out, leaving them as nothing but cold, jagged shadows against the backdrop of the stars. But the human fleet, the rust buckets, were vibrant. The Valiant Rose and its sister ships were now bathed in a shimmering, sapphire aura that pulsed in sync with the heartbeat signal. It wasn't just a jammer, it wasn't a virus. It was a localized gravitational anchor. The humans hadn't hacked the Elarian computers. They had used the Empress's own massive power output against her. They had turned the Star Eater into a giant battery and then flipped the polarity. They are draining us, the Admiral whispered, his bioluminescence fading to a dull, sickly gray. They aren't fighting our weapons, Majesty. They're feeding on our core. Elara watched as a small silver human shuttle detached from the Valiant Rose. It didn't fire a single shot. It simply drifted toward the massive docking bay of the flagship. Her internal security sensors were dead, but she could see it through the glass. It moved with a terrifying, calm confidence. "Intercept them," Elara commanded, her voice cracking. "Send the internal guard. Use the manual overrides." "The overrides are mechanical, Majesty," the Admiral gasped, struggling to breathe as the recycled air grew thin and stale. "But the doors?" "The magnetic seals have been fused shut by the surge. We are trapped inside our own fortress." The Empress looked back at the blue marble below. It no longer looked like a fragile prize. It looked like a predator that had been playing dead, waiting for her to step into its reach. She realized then that the humans hadn't been divided by their nations. They had been waiting for a singular target to unite against. Suddenly, a loud, metallic thud vibrated through the floor of the throne room. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sound of a docking clamp. Someone was knocking on the door of the most powerful woman in the galaxy. A small speaker on the wall, one used for emergency announcements, crackled to life. It shouldn't have had power, yet a voice came through clear, calm, and hauntingly polite. "Empress Elara? This is Captain Elias Thorne of the Terran United Defense. We noticed you're having some engine trouble. Would you like to negotiate your surrender before the oxygen runs out? Or should we just let the silence do the talking?" The Empress felt a tear of pure rage and terror track down her cheek. She, who had burned worlds, was being spoken to like a stranded motorist on a back road. "You dare," she whispered, though no one could hear her but the dying Admiral. "You dare mock the Alien Hegemony?" "We don't mock," the voice replied, as if he could hear her thoughts. "We just know how to handle uninvited guests. And lady, your invincible Armada just became the galaxy's largest collection of scrap metal." The hum of the Star Eater didn't just stop. It was replaced by a low, rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the Empress's very bones. It sounded like a funeral drum. Every time the pulse hit, another section of her glorious flagship went dark. From the throne, Elara watched as the distant lights of her sister ships, the Void Stalker and the Nova Bringer, flickered and died like candles in a gale. The tightening cage she had built around Earth was now a graveyard of cold titanium. "How?" Elara whispered, her voice cracking in the dim red emergency light. "Our shielding is multiphasic. Our hulls are reinforced with star matter. They shouldn't even be able to scratch our paint." The High Admiral was slumped against a dead console, his breathing heavy. "It wasn't a scratch, Majesty," he wheezed. "They didn't attack the hull. They attacked the frequency. Earth isn't just a planet, it's a giant magnet. They used their orbital satellites to amplify the Van Allen radiation belts. They turned their own world into a planetary-scale electromagnetic pulse. And we flew right into the heart of the coil. The sheer brilliance of the trap was sickening. The humans hadn't built a better weapon. They had simply turned their entire world into a giant off switch for anything that wasn't built with their specific primitive shielding. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors of the throne room doors designed to withstand a nuclear strike began to groan. The metal didn't melt. It shrieked as high-tension hydraulic spreaders forced them open from the outside. The Empress stood, drawing a ceremonial dagger made of blackened glass, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected a legion of armored giants. She expected monsters. Instead, as the doors hissed open, only two figures stepped through the steam of the depressurizing hallway. One was a man in a worn, grease-stained flight suit, carrying a tablet that looked like it had been dropped in a puddle. The other was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm smile. Wearing the simple uniform of the Terran diplomatic corps, they weren't even wearing breathers. They looked like they were walking into a library. "Empress Elara, I presume?" the woman said, her voice echoing in the hollow silence of the dead ship. "I'm Ambassador Sarah Chun, and this is Chief Engineer Miller. He's the one who figured out that your ships use a shared graviton lattice for stability. Very elegant design, by the way. It makes your fleet move like a single organism." Miller tapped his tablet, and a holographic map of the Elarian fleet appeared, only it was pulsing in red. "The problem with being a single organism, lady," Miller said, his voice raspy from years of engine fumes, "is that when the brain gets a seizure, the whole body stops moving. Your invincible Armada is currently experiencing a total systemic shutdown, and if I press this button, your life support systems start venting your atmosphere into the Atlantic Ocean." The Empress felt the air in the room grow thinner. She looked at her High Admiral, who was now unconscious on the floor. She looked back at the humans. They weren't gloating. They weren't screaming in triumph. They were looking at her with a terrifying, clinical pity. "You think this is over?" Elara spat, her eyes glowing with a desperate, fading light. "My empire spans 1,000 systems. If you do not release us, they will burn this little blue marble into a cinder." Ambassador Chun stepped closer, her heels clicking on the obsidian floor. "That's the thing, Empress. While you were busy laughing at our rust buckets, we sent a little gift back through your warp gate. A digital handshake, if you will. Right now, every shipyard, every colony, and every palace in your empire is receiving the same signal. We didn't just shut down your fleet. We just put your entire civilization on pause." The Empress felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her. "The entire empire?" she whispered, her voice failing. "Impossible. Our networks are layered in quantum encryption that would take a supernova's energy to crack." Engineer Miller didn't even look up from his tablet. He just let out a dry, hacking cough that sounded like gravel in a blender. "Encryption is just a lock, Majesty. We didn't pick the lock. We just changed the shape of the keyhole. Your ships use a universal synchronization pulse to keep your FTL drives from tearing themselves apart, right? Well, we realized that pulse is basically a heartbeat, and a heartbeat can be mimicked." Ambassador Chun stepped into the light of the dying throne room, her expression softening into something almost regretful. "We didn't want this, Elara. We spent decades listening to your broadcasts as you approached. We heard the screams of the worlds you integrated. We realized that if we fought you with fire, you'd just bring a bigger sun. So we decided to fight you with silence." Outside the window, a massive Elarian carrier, the pride of Orion, began to list heavily to the side. Without its automated stabilization thrusters, the Earth's gravity was beginning to claim it. It looked like a falling mountain of glass and steel, glowing dull red as it kissed the upper atmosphere. You're killing them," Elara choked out, pointing at the falling ship. "Thousands of my people are on that vessel." "Actually," Miller interrupted, "we've already sent our rust buckets to latch onto them with magnetic tethers. We're towing them into a stable parking orbit. We're humans, not monsters. We don't want a graveyard. We want a conversation. But that conversation only happens if you call off the automated retaliation protocol. Your capital world is currently warming up." The Empress froze. The retaliation protocol was a fail-safe scorched earth command that would trigger if the Empress's life signs disappeared or if the flagship was compromised. It was a weapon of pure spite, designed to erase a solar system from existence. "I cannot stop it," Elara said, a dark, triumphant spark returning to her eyes. The protocol is hardwired into the Imperial core back on our home world. It requires a biometric confirmation from my throne. And as you can see, your little silence has cut the transmission. In 6 hours, Earth will be nothing but a memory. The tension in the room spiked. Miller and Chun exchanged a look that wasn't fear, it was calculation. 6 hours? Miller muttered, tapping his screen. That's plenty of time. Sarah, the signal's ready. If the Empress won't play ball, we'll have to use the back door. The back door? Elara demanded. What madness are you speaking of? Ambassador Chun looked the Empress directly in the eye, and for the first time, Elara saw the true depth of human ambition. It wasn't about conquest or territory. It was about survival at any cost. You see, Empress, we didn't just study your technology. We studied your history. We know about the Great Silence in your 4th dynasty, the time your ancestors almost wiped themselves out because of a solar flare that blinded your communications. How do you know that? Elara gasped. That history was sacred, hidden from outsiders. Because, Chun whispered, while you were laughing at our primitive ships, our deep space probes were busy digging through your digital trash for the last 50 years. We found your ancient recovery codes. The ones your people forgot existed. The ones that can reboot the entire Imperial network from a single terminal. Miller turned the tablet toward the Empress. On the screen was a blinking icon, a golden seal that hadn't been seen in the Elarian Empire for 10,000 years. It was the primal key. We're not going to destroy your empire, Elara, Shin said. We're going to give it a new heart. One that listens to us. Now give us your hand. We need your thumbprint to authorize the reboot, or Earth and your entire fleet here go up in flames together. The Empress looked at her hand, then at the falling ships, then at the 2 humans standing in the ruins of her power. She was the Void Queen, the ruler of 1,000 stars. And yet, she was being offered a choice: stay a queen of a dead world, or become a puppet in a game she didn't even understand. The Empress's hand trembled as it hovered over the glowing tablet. This wasn't just a biometric scan. It was a surrender of her soul, her history, and the very foundation of Elarian supremacy. If I do this, she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice, I am a traitor to my blood. My people will see me as a puppet of a species that still uses combustion engines. Engineer Miller didn't look up, his fingers dancing across the screen to stabilize the connection. Lady, right now your people are mostly worried about why their coffee machines stopped working and why their planetary defense grid is suddenly playing 20th century jazz. Trust me, traitor is a step up from extinct. With a sharp, jagged breath, Elara pressed her thumb onto the glass. A golden ripple spiraled outward from the point of contact, surging through the tablet into the Star Eater's dead consoles, and then, with a roar of static, into the void of space. For a second, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, the black screens across the throne room ignited. Data began to scream across the displays at a rate no human eye could follow, but Elara's augmented vision saw it all. The retaliation protocol, a countdown that had been ticking toward Earth's incineration, froze at 004. System reboot initiated, a melodic, artificial voice announced not in the Elarian tongue, but in perfect, crisp English. The Empress collapsed back into her throne, the weight of her crown suddenly feeling like a leaden shackle. You've rewritten our OS, she breathed, horrified. You didn't just bypass the security. You translated our entire civilization into your own logic. Information is the ultimate equalizer, Ambassador Chen said, stepping back and smoothing her uniform. You thought our technology was primitive because it was physical. Metal, wires, glass, but we spent our centuries mastering the intangible. While you were building bigger cannons, we were building better bridges. Outside the hull, the sapphire glow of the human fleet began to fade, but it wasn't because they were losing power. They were releasing the tether. The massive Elarian warships, once drifting like corpses, began to level out. Their lights returned, but they weren't the aggressive, predatory red of the Empire. They were a soft Terran white, What happens now? Elara asked, looking at the two humans who had just dismantled a millennium of conquest with a grease-stained tablet. Now, Miller said, finally shutting off his device and tucking it into his pocket, we go to the cafeteria. Because while we were busy saving the world, my shift ended 10 minutes ago, and I'm starving. Also, you're coming with us. We have a lot of paperwork to go over regarding your unauthorized parking in our orbit. The Empress looked at the High Admiral, who was finally stirring on the floor. He looked up at the humans, then at his queen, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. The humans weren't shackling them. They weren't even drawing weapons. They were simply waiting. But as Elara stood to follow them, a new alarm began to wail. It wasn't a system failure this time. It was a long-range scan. Miller, Chun said, her voice losing its calm edge. Check the deep space sensors. We've got a massive signature jumping in from the Andromeda fringe. It's not Elarian. Miller's face went pale as he checked his tablet. It's a Reaper-class swarm. They must have detected the reboot signal. They're scavengers, Majesty. They wait for empires to blink, and then they move in to pick the bones. The Empress felt a cold surge of irony. She had been the predator moments ago. Now she was the bait. And the humans, for all their cleverness, had just rang the dinner bell for something far worse than her. The bridge of the Star Eater didn't just grow cold. It felt as if the vacuum of space itself had reached through the hull. On the primary tactical display, now running on a jury-rig human, a swarm of jagged obsidian shapes began to tear through the fabric of reality. These weren't ships. They were organic nightmares, living metal that pulsed with a sickly violet light. The Reapers. They've been waiting, Elara whispered, her regal composure shattering. They follow the scent of collapsing empires. My reboot. It sent a flare into the dark that told them the Alien Hegemony was vulnerable. High Admiral Kale, finally regaining his feet, stared at the sensor readouts in horror. Majesty, our weapons are still calibrating from the restart. Our shields are at 12%. We are sitting ducks for a swarm of that magnitude. They'll strip the alloys from our hulls while we're still alive inside. Engineer Miller didn't panic. Instead, he did something that made the Empress's heart skip a beat. He started laughing. It wasn't the laugh of a madman, but the dry, cackling chuckle of a mechanic who had just found a shortcut. 12% shields, huh? Miller muttered, his fingers flying across the tablet. And your primary cannons are offline because the cooling vents are stuck in safe mode? This is not a time for your primitive humor, human, the Admiral roared. We are all about to be consumed. Relax, Sparky, Miller said, not even looking up. Ambassador, tell the Valiant Rose to initiate the Lightning Rod Protocol, and tell them to overclock the planetary grid. We're going to give these overgrown space locusts a taste of Earth's hospitality. Ambassador Chien nodded, her face grim. Empress, I suggest you tell your fleet to drop their internal dampeners. This is going to get loud. As the Reaper swarm descended like a cloud of soot toward Earth's orbit, the human rust buckets didn't flee. They did the opposite. They accelerated, diving straight into the gaps between the massive, paralyzed Elarian warships. They began to spin, trailing long, shimmering filaments of superconducting wire that linked the Elarian flagship to the rest of the Armada. What are they doing? Elara gasped, watching the screen. They're weaving us together. We're making a circuit, Miller explained, a manic glint in his eye. Your ships have the biggest capacitors in the quadrant. Earth has the biggest magnetic field. We're just the jumper cables. The first Reaper ship opened its maw, preparing to fire a beam of pure antimatter at the Star Eater. But before the violet light could leave its throat, the entire Earth seemed to ignite. A pillar of pure, white energy surged upward from the North Pole, channeled through the human satellites, and slammed into the Valiant Rose. The human ship didn't explode. It acted as a prism. The energy was redirected through the superconducting wires, surging into the Star Eater's massive frame. The Empress felt her hair stand on end as trillions of volts of planetary static channeled through the ship's hull. The Star Eater became a giant, glowing tuning fork. "Now!" Miller screamed. The energy didn't stay in the Elarian ships. It jumped. A massive arc of planetary lightning leaped from the Star Eater's bow, striking the lead Reaper ship. The electrical discharge was so powerful, it didn't just short out the enemy, it vaporized the organic matter inside the Reaper's hull instantly. The chain reaction was spectacular. Every Reaper ship within 10,000 miles was caught in a web of Terran-channeled lightning. The void of space was momentarily brighter than 1,000 suns. The Empress shielded her eyes, her breath hitching in her throat. She had spent her life studying the art of war, but she had never seen anything so raw, so chaotic, and so devastatingly beautiful. When the light faded, the Reaper swarm was gone. Only drifting ash remained. Elara turned to Miller, who was calmly wiping a smudge off his tablet. You used your own planet as a battery?" "Nah," Miller said with a wink. "We used your ship as the spark plug. We just provided the kick." But as the cheers erupted from the human cums, Ambassador Chun stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the long-range scanners. "Miller, look at the signature. The swarm we just hit? That was just the scout party. The main hive. It's already here." The sensor screen didn't just turn red. It saturated into a deep, bruising purple. Beyond the drifting ash of the scouts, the very stars seemed to blink out as a shadow 10 times the size of the Star Eater eclipsed the sun. It was the hive heart, a living fortress of ancient, hungry consciousness that hadn't been seen in this quadrant for an eon. "It's over," Admiral Kale whispered, falling to his knees. "The hive heart. It doesn't use electronics. It's a biological singularity. Your lightning, your hackers, they won't even tickle it. It will swallow Earth whole." Empress Elara looked at Ambassador Chen. For the first time she saw a flicker of genuine fear in the human's eyes. But beneath that fear was something else, something stubborn. "Miller," Chen said, her voice barely a whisper, "is the long shot ready?" Miller wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his hands finally shaking. "The long shot? Sarah, that's theoretical. If we miss, we don't just lose the ship. We lose the moon. We're out of maybe options, Miller." "Do it." The Empress watched, breathless, as the human rust buckets performed a maneuver that defied every law of Elarian naval doctrine. Instead of forming a defensive line, they began to orbit the Star Eater at impossible speeds, their sapphire thrusters bleeding into a continuous ring of light. "Empress," Miller said, looking her in the eye, "I need your throne's graviton emitters, not for power, for focus. We're going to use your ship's hull as a literal magnifying glass for Earth's core. You'll melt my flagship." Elara protested. "Better a melted ship than a digested planet," Miller retorted. "Give me the authorization now." Elara didn't hesitate. She slammed her palm onto the command glass. "Full access granted. All systems to the humans." The Star Eater groaned, its massive structure twisting as the human shuttles began to warp the gravitational fields around it. The ship wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a lens. Deep within the Earth, the humans triggered a series of seismic resonators. A focused beam of pure kinetic energy surged up from the planet's molten core, striking the Star Eater. Instead of shattering, the flagship channeled the energy through its diamond glass hull, focused by the human-made gravitational ring. A beam of white-hot gravity, a literal spear of the world, lanced out into the dark. It didn't strike the hive heart's armor. It struck its center of mass. The vacuum of space didn't carry the sound, but everyone on the bridge felt the psychic scream of the hive heart as its internal gravity collapsed. The massive entity folded in on itself, crushed by the weight of its own existence, before detonating in a silent, brilliant supernova of violet light. When the flares cleared, the sky was empty. The Reapers were gone. The Empress stood in the silent, dimly lit ruins of her throne room, looking at the two humans. They were exhausted, covered in soot, and leaning against each other for support. "You," You didn't just stop them. Elara breathed, a strange new warmth blooming in her chest. Not the heat of conquest, but the fire of respect. You used your home as a weapon. You fought with the very heart of your world. That's the thing about humans, Empress, Ambassador Chun said, offering a tired smile. We're messy, we're divided, and our tech is held together by duct tape and hope. But if you threaten our home, we'll turn the entire universe into a trap just to keep you off our lawn. The Empress looked out at the Earth. It was still there, blue, beautiful, and terrifyingly resilient. She realized then that she hadn't found a new colony. She had found a partner, or perhaps a protector. Admiral, Elara commanded, her voice regaining its steel, signal the Empire. Tell them the war is over. And tell them we're staying. I have a feeling we have a lot to learn from these primitive Terrans. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of human defiance, don't forget to hit that like button and share this story with your fellow star travelers. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more tales of humanity showing the galaxy what we're made of, make sure to subscribe to HFY Scape and turn on those notifications. Thanks for listening, and remember, never underestimate a rust bucket.